Now I want to turn to another issue, and this is the question of the fringe or niche nature of the SCP. Now, if you type in most popular online poetry publications into Google, it gives you results of a lot of very prestigious journals. The SCP, of course, is not on this list. It hasn't been around for as long as these other journals, and it's also fringe on top of that. But since these other journals aren't fringe, exactly how popular are they? I mean, we know everybody wants to be publishing them, but how many people are actually reading them? Well, I did a little research on this. Not Zoe B level research, mind you, where I'm reading everything and constructing graphs or anything, but I did some basic research. I used a website checker to look up the organic traffic metrics of all the major journals and magazines that publish poetry, and I compiled a list of the top 20. It's kind of a mix of poetry-only publications and broader literary venues that also publish poetry. I do not include sites like allpoetry.com, which is more of like a blog where people just upload their poetry. So this list only includes, vetted publications with editors and a submission process. Now again, this only shows organic traffic metrics coming from search engines and social media posts, not paid traffic coming from clicking on an ad or direct traffic coming from just typing in the URL. So it's not complete, but it does reflect what people are looking for. What I found was rather shocking. So here they are, the top 20 most popular poetry publications in the English-speaking world. Now I'm just going to go down the list. Number 1, The New Yorker. No surprise there, 5 million hits this month. But if we look at their most popular subdomains, almost none of their traffic actually goes to any poetry pages. Nobody reads it. Number 2, the Poetry Foundation. I've talked about them before. 3.2 million views. It's instructive to look at what their top pages are. The Raven, 75,000 views. If, 50,000. The Road Not Taken, also 50,000. Ozymandias, 30,000. So right there, of the 3.2 million total hits for the domain, about 200,000 of those are hits to just 4 pages of legacy poetry. And my guess is that most of the other 3 million views are also mostly related to legacy poets. It is notable that when you type these poems into your Google search, the Poetry Foundation website is the top result, while the second result is the number 3 entry, poets.org, the site for the Academy of American Poets, sitting at a little less than 1 million hits, or about 850,000. Similarly, their top traffic mostly goes to legacy poetry. Dylan Thomas, Robert Frost, James Weldon Johnson, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Interesting. And Langston Hughes. Now before we move on, I just need to pause for a moment and highlight the featured poet of their Poem a Day section. Andrea Abbey Karam is a trans Swana, Southwest Asian and North African poet performer cyborg. Yes, that's right. We've all been so concerned about the takeover of ChatGPT and its ability to write poetry and making us poor human poets obsolete, but we never considered that cyborgs walk among us, and that they've already covered this ground. Now, I'm not going to read Abbey Karam's poem Standing Dead, but if you're watching this, you can pause to admire some of the choice vocabulary in the poem, particularly the word transcendence or transexcendence. I don't know. Just the word transcendence, but with an X instead of a C. But whatever this word is supposed to mean, presumably it involves mixing gender reassignment therapy with bodily mechanical upgrades to transcend the limitations of the human. Are there any poets left in the mainstream establishment who aren't just eccentric weirdos who confuse their eccentricity with creative originality? Hold that thought because I'm going to come back to it. Next on our list, number 4, Paris Review. About 100,000 views, one of the most prestigious literary magazines, of course, although significantly less popular than the very top ones, which hoard all the glory. Similarly, like the New Yorker, it has a poetry section that nobody really reads. Number 5, pw.org, home base of Poets and Writers magazine, at 65,000 views a month. Most of this traffic has to do with the fact that the website and magazines serve networking purposes, how to get published in other magazines, how to connect with people, how to find a literary agent, job listings, all of which would be useful if all these magazines, publishing houses, and agents in question weren't utterly corrupt. Now, if you look at Poets and Writers' database of literary publications, which ranges from print magazines to online journals and goes on for 37 pages with 25 or so names on every page, that amounts to almost 1,000 publications. The SCP is not on this list. We're just not notable enough, as Wikipedia keeps reminding us. And can I just on a side note talk about how really stupid the names of a lot of these journals are? Pinhole Poetry is a digital poetry journal that loves the upside down view and the fact that some art can only happen in the dark. Okay, so apparently art is the equivalent of a drunken hookup at a frat party. Jelly Bucket. Jelly Bucket features established and new writers and artists. We are committed to publishing writers from and writing about marginalized and underrepresented communities. No surprise there. Now, I guess establishing poetry journals has become kind of like when angsty high school kids get together to form a band, and they just come up with the most ridiculous name they can think of for their band. And the teenage musicians in this band, well, they don't really have any formal training, so their music is really sloppy and just really not good at all. But they enjoy doing it because they're expressing themselves. And really, who's going to tell teenagers that they can't play music or can't express themselves? Nobody. But when Dad comes in and he says, "Hey, can you guys keep it down? It's really noisy in the house and I can't hear myself think," they're like, "Oh, Dad, come on, get with it. You're so lame. We're just having fun." These journals and their contributors, they're still like these angsty teenagers inside. I mean, they're English professors now, but they're still revolutionaries at heart. Even though they have tenure and they're completely part of the establishment, the revolution has become institutionalized. And that dad who's complaining about all the noise they're making, well, Dad has been kicked out of the house. He's been left in the cold. Number 6, McSweeney's, at about 50,000 views. I may not agree with its politics, but it does have some really funny and clever stuff sometimes. Number 7, poetryarchive.org, 38,000. This is more of a database, but it also has an online publication. It's interesting that it focuses on audio recordings of poetry. There's a lot of really bad contemporary poets represented, but there's also some great legacy stuff, so it's worth checking out. Number 8, The Sun magazine, 22,000. Another hybrid literary magazine where poetry is marginalized. Number 9, the Society of Classical Poets. Hey, there we are. 20,000 views. Now, when I checked this last month, it said 50,000, but maybe that's because that was more towards the end of the month, so I don't know why the drop, but whatever. Number 10, the Hypertexts. 10,000 hits this month. Now, if you look at the bottom of the main webpage, we are told that the site has been visited over 16 million times since January 2010. That is a lot. Congratulations, Hypertexts. Since the Hypertext publishes poetry, one might think that indeed this is a triumph for the promotion of formal verse. And you wouldn't be wrong to think this. The site's most popular poetry-related page, Best Unknown Poets, is a thoughtful meditation on works of such undervalued writers as Edward Arlington Robinson, the anonymous medieval arch poet Charles d'Orléans, and others. And the site does feature a wide variety of excellent published poetry more generally. But a lot of the hypertext's traffic comes from a rather surprising source. We notice that actually nearly 30% of its organic traffic, in fact, comes from just 2 pages. Famous Beauties with Small Breasts, a meticulous catalog of at least 100 different celebrities and their bra sizes, and Visible Panty Line, in which the question is asked, is the visible panty line a fashion no-no, or is it an exciting glimpse at a woman's unmentionables? If we scroll down, because really, how could we resist? The top picture's caption reads, "White cotton panties are clearly visible through a sheer chiffon-like dress. Is this the best visible panty line picture of all time?" Well, what can I say, hypertexts? Except that I admire your entrepreneurial spirit. So much so, in fact, that I may have to adopt your method for my own YouTube channel. You really know how to get people excited about poetry. Number 11, Canyon Review, 7.8 thousand views. Another hybrid turned to garbage. Number 12, poetrysociety.org, 6.6K. This is the site for the Poetry Society of America. This is actually the oldest poetry organization in the US, founded in 1910. And like the other legacy organizations, it has gone woke. Number 13, Virginia Quarterly Review, 5.9 thousand, which is followed closely by number 14, Granta, at 5.8 thousand. Not much to say about these, just more trash. So you see that we are getting to the lower echelons of the upper crust publications, and as we're doing this, they're very closely following on each other's heels. Plowshares is number 15 at 5.1 thousand views. Now, this is Emerson College's publication, founded by Charles Wesley Emerson in 1880 to be a school for oratory. Charles was, fun fact, a cousin of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Now, I'm sure if he saw the kind of trash his institution was churning out today, he would be deeply disappointed. Number 16, Rattle, 4,700 views. Not a hybrid, just devoted to poetry, this one. The main page features some kind of computational poem, which, when decoded, reveals itself to be just utterly trivial. I actually think I prefer the coded, unreadable version of this to the decoded version, which is equally unreadable, but in a different way. Number 17, Agni, a literary magazine named after the Vedic fire god, one of several publications on this list that has personally rejected my work. It does feature an interesting article about the poetry of Rilke and a translation of one of his poems. Now, does it bother anybody that these organizations, they spend so much time commenting on the classic poems of the past, on how, beautiful or powerful they are, but they seem completely unable or unwilling to produce it themselves or to promote that kind of stuff now? It's just kind of frustrating that they claim these poets for themselves, but that they really don't represent them. Just a thought. Number 18, Threepenny Review, 1,600 views. They don't put much effort into their website or their poetry editing. Number 19, American Poetry Review, 1,500. Number 20, The Southern Review, 1,400. And as I said earlier, we get into these lower echelons. They're just following very closely on each other. There's a lot of journals sitting at around 1,000 hits or even less. The vast majority get almost no views. Now, if you take the time to really wade through this stuff, it boggles the mind because there are probably more poets alive on Earth right now than there were at any time in all of history combined, and most of them are absolutely awful. So to sum up, I was surprised by these results. Honestly, I knew the SCP was growing, but I didn't know how much. It is quite literally crushing most of the competition in terms of popularity. And when you eliminate the websites that are broader literary publications, New Yorker, Paris Review, McSweeney's, Poets and Writers, and the Poetry Archive audio database, that's in kind of its own category. When you eliminate those, you're left with really only two competitors as far as being poetry exclusive sites that publish the work of contemporary poets, and that's Poetry Foundation and Poets.org, which as far as I know makes the SCP number 3 in this category. Now, admittedly, the Society's traffic is far below the traffic of these two organizations. They have the advantage of being much older, and they're very well endowed. They just have a lot of money to throw around. But as I noted earlier, while these two sites do get considerably more traffic than the SCP, most of this traffic is going to pages of poems written by Poe, Frost, Longfellow, etc., which is extremely hypocritical, giving them mission statements and who they're giving awards to, and featuring and just their general woke mentality. To return to my earlier analogy of the high school band and the angsty teenagers who have kicked the uncool dad out of the house, Poetry Foundation and the Academy of American Poets are both like that. They've kicked dad out, but they're still paying child support. These organizations are living off of those handouts. All their contemporary poets on the site are radical intersectional freeversers, but all of their traffic is going to their database of poetry written by dead white males. Nobody cares about these BIPOC commitments. They're surviving off of the fumes of their legacy and biting the hand that feeds them. Now, admittedly, a lot of the SCP traffic is also going to, legacy pages like the 10 greatest love poems. The difference here is that there's no hypocrisy, though. This is the type of poetry that the organization actively promotes. And it is why, in a very short time frame, the site has surpassed the popularity of much older and more prestigious publications that, unlike the Poetry Foundation, they don't have this legacy database to feed off of. But they are associated with universities and have things like grants to keep them on life support. So they actually they don't really need to be popular in order to continue to survive. Now, if you ask these editors what the popular publications are, they'll of course tell you, well, themselves. And if they're aware of the SCP at all, they will tell you to stay far away from that fringe group. The thing about it is, though, it just isn't fringe anymore. It's what people want to read. And here I'm returning to what I said earlier about the divide between the professional class and the working class types. This was not always a divide that existed. Go back to the 19th century and look at who the chief figures associated with the American Renaissance were. Who were they? Ralph Waldo Emerson was a minister. Henry Thoreau was a pencil maker. Herman Melville was a sailor. They were rustic nobodies. Interestingly, most of them were also the direct descendants of farmers who fought at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Now, the only professional men of letters were Edgar Allan Poe, who barely scraped by and was always desperate for cash, go figure, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, who had to supplement his writing career with day jobs like working as a customs officer. In the 20th century, Robert Frost was a college dropout turned farmer. It used to be the case that relative Joe Schmoes like these could get their work published, even if, like Herman Melville or Thoreau, their greatest work wasn't recognized in their own lifetime. They were still able to get the work out there enough so that the critics could savage it. But with the rise of Silicon Valley and the liberal shift towards supposedly greater equality, this is no longer the case. Whatever the left-wing commitment to surface-level diversity in the form of, skin color and gender, the literary world is less equal than it ever has been. And if you don't have the right credentials, they keep you out. And the people at the top are stupider than ever. In 19th century America, the two books that you commonly found in every frontier home were the King James Bible and the works of William Shakespeare. Now, these were not just idle volumes sitting on the shelf, they were a source of entertainment. You'd gather around the fireside with your family and read and recite the stuff. This is, not surprisingly, where the fireside poets got their name from. So this rustic frontierman with his two books and his non-standardized grade school education brought up on McGuffey readers was more cultured than the tech-savvy college graduate got into Harvard because of affirmative action, doesn't know anything, and now works at the New York Times. Well, it's true that formerly marginalized groups have been given a literary voice, and I stress the term formerly. All that's happened is that we have switched out one elite for another, while the average person is more disenfranchised than ever. And if you're not part of this new elite, you're relegated to self-publishing, to independently publishing, which results in your work getting very little attention. Naturally, the people who have been shut out from these publications have turned to forming alternative intellectual networks and organizations in response to this. The most successful result of this in the poetry world is the Society of Classical Poets. And you've seen how the mainstream poetry world responds. They hate us. They want to shut us down. They're always savaging our work and talking about how terrible we are. We get no sympathy whatsoever.